Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. Today was a day of some political upheaval considering the developments in the Supreme Court. We saw the Supreme Court finally agreed to an extension, 6-month extension, and also has said that legislation, talked about legislation within a period of 6 months. We'll be talking about the effects of this, the challenges that the government faces in the upcoming 6 months with regard to this development. Of course, Imran Khan, the Prime Minister, has also said that people who were expecting a clash of institutions will be disappointed after this development. Let's talk about all of this. Let's talk about the effects of this development for the country, for the parliament, for democracy in the upcoming 6 months. I have with me Barrister Danish Iftikhar, who's a legal expert. Thank you for being with us today. Dr. Zubair Ghori, who's a political analyst. Thank you for joining us today. And Mohammad Ibrahim Khan, who's an MNA with PTI. Thank you for joining us. Danish, like I said, today, of course, we all know the kind of developments that actually happened as far as the Supreme Court is concerned. It took 2 days and a lot has been said back and forth with the government making some comments, with, of course, the Supreme Court also saying. What's your opinion on the way that things have turned out as far as the Supreme Court is concerned? Of course, they've granted the extension. Of course, on the other hand, they're also talking about legislation. Of course, in a sense, this is a sensitive topic. There has not been legislation on it. As a lawyer, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think firstly and foremostly, the Pakistan Army is a very strong institution in Pakistan.
Right.
As we all know, it is also cited as a primary example of an institution where there is disciplinary control and properly administered, managed, and the chain of command is such that people cite examples of it. So, I mean, in many quarters, there will be a huge sigh of relief that, at least the uncertainty is over now. And, because by tonight, it wasn't decided, I mean, earlier in the day, it wasn't known for sure whether General Bajwa would continue for the next day or not. So that period is over now. The uncertainty has been, removed. However, there are many aspects of this case that, will have very important ramifications in the future. Primarily being, the appointment and the extension of the army chief, whether how it should be done, whether the rules are followed in every case or not. I mean, if you take the last 2 decades or so, General Raheel Sharif is the only, retired General Raheel Sharif is the only one who wasn't granted, or he didn't get an extension by himself. Otherwise, all of them got extensions, General Kiani, General Musharraf, and so on and so forth, and now General Bajwa as well. So there were many comments made by certain quarters, by legal experts about, the validity of this act, the extension, whether it should be granted or not. Previously, when the extension of General Kiani was challenged, when it was granted by in President Zardari's era, it was challenged before the Islamabad High Court. But because it was held that it was non-maintainable and it was not, but in this particular instance, the Supreme Court of Pakistan took up this case and took up all the procedures adopted behind it, the laws concerning it, and whether the proper procedure was followed or not. And I think that there will be certainty with respect to the appointment of or extension of the tenure of army chief if the recommendations made by the judiciary, the top judges, they are implemented by the parliament. If there is legislation, people will.
But is there a question of if there will be? Of course, the Supreme Court is directed, then, there's no question of it has to be done, right?
Well, I say if. The reason why I say if is because this government has failed primarily in passing through legislations in many areas, as we all know.
But what is the effect, legally speaking, of the Supreme Court saying that that legislation should come through within a period of 6 months? When the Supreme Court lays that down, what's the effect of it?
There's a short order that was passed, and I'm not sure what the long order will be, but probably it should be binding in nature, given the context of it, given the nature of the arguments that were presented, and the nature of the questioning that happened in the courtrooms. And I think that the government has to do it. However, if the government cannot resort to the previous behavior whereby it introduced legislation through ordinances, you know, because the whole purpose will be defeated.
It has to be done through the, right,
it should be done with the parliament, and the reason why it should be done by the parliament is because the judges, they have exercised judicial restraint, and they have said, okay, this is an issue, you might have not followed certain procedure, but we are going to show restraint, and we are going to allow the elected representatives to decide this matter and not intervene in other, you know, institutions.
Right. We'll be talking, we'll go into what kind of difficulties, if any, it actually, you know, for the government in the next couple of months. But as far as the Prime Minister is concerned, he said, you know, as Imran Khan tweeted, and he talked about, he said that today must be of great disappointment to those who expected the country to be destabilized by a clash of institutions. That this did not happen must be of special disappointment to our external enemies and mafias within. Zubair Sahab, in your opinion, you know, what's your take on this as far as the Prime Minister is concerned when he talks about mafias both in and outside the country? At this time, of course, stability to the region is very important. What do you think an extension for the COS means for that kind of stability, and how important do you see that extension to be?
Thank you very much for inviting. First of all, it's a sigh of relief for the whole nation. For the last 3 days, 72 hours or so, the whole nation was flabbergasted and staring at their TV screens that what is going to come out of this situation. Whenever I think in the last few years that this could be the last exciting, the maximum excitement that this country of the pure,
right,
there's another new excitement comes in, and particularly with this government, the excitements keep coming in. Just before this incident, there was the whole drama or the saga revolving around the departure of ex-Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif to the UK. Before that, the UN Assembly address and the kudos to everybody that we have done great things, and the Kashmir thing, and things go on, there's a long list. But all is well that ends well. And I think it is the magnanimity of the Supreme Court of Pakistan and the Chief Justice of Pakistan who has showed this magnanimity, and he said that we have exercised judicial restraint for this thing, and the government has been given this due right to put things in order. Well, looking at this thing from being a student of political science, I can see that 3 things have emerged out of today's situation. Let's see the positive sides of this. There has been a role of the civilian supremacy, that if somebody thought that there are sacred cows in these countries and nobody could be talking about them, there is the supreme attendance of the civilian supremacy that has been paramount there. And Chief Justice of Pakistan has established that. And it has asked the Pakistani parliament to decide it further. If there was no legislation, okay, let's accept that, do that legislation to bring things in order. And it is with the Parliament of Pakistan. It is the people of Pakistan. This is a great day. This is a great achievement for the people and the democracy and the future Parliament of Pakistan. The second thing is we are not a banana republic. We are a functioning democracy, and where everybody have their role and responsibility according to the division of power, and they should perform, and they perform their duties under certain limitation, under certain rules and regulations.
Right.
And the third thing is that it's a kind of a wake-up call for this government that this is a national attitude of taking things casually. This is a wake-up call for the government also, that please stop taking things casually. These are the very important matters. These are the destiny of the people. The future of our nation has been decided. So you have to be more careful while taking all these considerations into mind. So for me, this is a watershed moment for Pakistan's history, as Danisha has pointed out, that now we will decide, the people of Pakistan will decide, the Parliament of Pakistan will decide that how should we move about, particularly on this affair.
Do you think that, I'll come back to you, I'm going to go to Muhammad Ibrahim Saab with this. Ibrahim Saab, as far as this move is concerned by the Supreme Court, do you think that it's also in a sense an act of perhaps, you know, establishing or balancing the powers between institutions, so to speak, when the Supreme Court chooses to throw the ball in, you know, in the court of the Parliament here? Do you think that it's sort of balancing the power structure in a sense, because it's giving that power, like Zubair Saab said, to the Parliament now?
Absolutely, this is one positive aspect of it that Mr. Zubair Sahab pointed out. The other one is that there were certain vacuums or lacunas within the law, prevailing law or 243, if I'm not wrong.
But to be fair, that's never been a source of, you know, what can one say, discomfort or a problem for the government of the day at any time.
But I think let's take it very positively. If Chief Justice of Pakistan has pointed out something which is very legitimate and according to the law, because defining the tenure of the COS, it's not mentioned there in the law, and it should be mentioned, and he has referred it to the proper forum, and that is the Parliament of Pakistan, I mean National Assembly of Pakistan, that you should decide that, so there should never again rise in a situation where there could be stories made up within, like he said, within
of course,
72
you know, you're
hours.
right that it has to be taken positively. It should be taken positively, but there's no denying that this is uncharted territory, and for the Supreme Court to, you know, to go into this field and then, you know, like I said, to indicate that the Parliament to adjudicate on this matter, it's not something that has happened before in this country. It's something, you're right, it should be looked at a positive step, but of course it does pose challenges for your government, does it not, in the next couple of months?
I don't think so, because what the Chief Justice of Pakistan has said and done within the parameters of the law. And since they are the experts of the law and they see some loopholes or some deficiencies or some things which are not properly
very true, but
explained.
those deficiencies have not been pointed out in this area since the inception of the country. That itself is a fact.
There is always a
I would
first.
just like to add one thing.
I'll come back to you.
I know, but I think we should respect and we should
yes, definitely.
we should respect and we should acknowledge that
Right.
he pointed out the right thing, and that should be corrected.
But
and
let me come back to you.
there is
Danish, I'll
always a
come to you.
time for the for improvement in the
But
laws.
what does the Prime Minister mean when he talks about mafias, and he talks about mafias who stash their loot abroad and
exactly
they want to protect
this is exactly
so
what
so
he
it's
means.
a conspiracy. It was, in his opinion.
No, I don't think he said it was a conspiracy. All he said was that the way they blown it out of
Right.
proportion,
Fair enough.
and the way they manipulated things, and there's a conspiracy, and there is this, and there is that, and people start coming
You're
up with
saying let's
different
not
ideas.
talk about conspiracy. Let's not talk about any theories of
I
any
think
kind.
it was purely a very sincere, legitimate, legal aspect of it, which should be now made it to perfection, and for the assistance of the future governments.
I would just like to add one thing, that you were
Danish,
talking about
please
the
go on.
challenges. You talked about challenges for
Right.
the government. You know, whenever there is a challenge, there is an opportunity. And now the government and the whole country has an opportunity to put this matter at rest, you know, because this debate has been going on for too long.
Right,
Whether
and-
to
and
get an
like,
extension or not to get an
Zubair Sahab
extension. When the matter will be in the Parliament, there will be ample time and opportunity for different viewpoints to emerge. And that will be good for the whole democracy and for the whole laying to rest this controversy over whether extensions should be granted and whether they should be granted in every instance, or there should be some ad hoc extension, or on a case-to-case basis. So this is an opportunity for the government. I think it should lead the way, and I think that the press conference that they did, the Attorney General, and he was taking this in a positive step, in a positive direction. That was, I think, a very good thinking on his part and the part of the government, that they want to legislate on this matter, and I think this should be commended as well. Another point I wanted to make was that one huge aspect of this case is also.
But Danish, will it
Yes.
be easy to legislate? I mean, of course, I mean, no one's doubting the intention of the government, like you said, of course, and Ibrahim Saab is also saying that the government is taking this positively, the Attorney General also. That is true. But when you talk about legislation on this very sensitive topic, will it be easy for the government to get the numbers, to get it passed? How do you see the dynamics of that once it goes into the Parliament?
I think in this manner, in this perspective also, if you look at it, there is an opportunity once again. And that opportunity being that this is such a sensitive and such an important matter, that the government has to take every party, every political party on board. Something, the intention of which we saw lacking in the past, on one pretext or the other, Now we have, the cases against Nawaz Sharif and what's going on, all that behind us now. We don't have arguments about whether, there is selective accountability, at least for the time being. This is the national cause, and I think all parties have to come together in the same manner as they have done in the past, like the Peshawar attack, when the all parties conference was convened and all of them got together. This is
But
such
what
a,
about all
yeah.
the, once it comes into the parliament, of course, a lot of things will be discussed which have been confidential, historically speaking, as far as pertaining to the army is concerned, pertaining to this very, very respectful office in the country is concerned. How do you see that development?
Well, I don't think that we have to discuss official secrets or, something which is very sensitive in that respect. But I mean,
but
the whole,
other than that,
yeah.
the way that, of course, the Supreme Court also talked about this, the pay structure, the way that, the office itself, a lot of things regarding, this appointment will be laid bare in the parliament.
Yes, there should be, and I mean, it's a public office. It's, it's the army is obviously, it's it falls under the domain of the government, and I think that this is good in the sense that whenever there is transparency, and even the army has been advocating transparency in its ranks. We have seen, certain cases of mismanagement and corruption being brought by the army itself. So I don't think it's something which they will be afraid of or be shy of. They'll be more forthcoming. They will participate. I think their input should be sought also, and they will give their input. I'm sure there will be briefings, and perhaps we might also see some in-camera briefings. We don't know what the government intends to do in the future, and let's see. Let's hope for the best. But one thing I want to point it out also is that people, those people who were saying back in August, or even when the Prime Minister, he granted an extension. He said that it was imperative for the regional security situation.
Right.
And but now in this particular manner, we have had this uncertainty looming, and the next day we didn't know whether the army chief would be here or not. But Alhamdulillah, everything went along fine, and nothing awkward happened. So what I'm trying to suggest is that it's not something that we should sit and we should decide that, look, this personality or that personality is is vital for the interest of Pakistan. We should see what is best for the institution. We should go for institution buildings, and institutions, as we all know, they should not be personality driven. They should be merit based, and they should follow the rules. And I think.
But what about? I mean, of course. I mean, it's interesting. Like Zubair Saab pointed out that since the very beginning of the inception of Pakistan, we've seen extensions being granted, and apart from one or two cases that have, it's always been the way things have happened. This law, the way that it will be formulated, and of course the fine points of it, the way they will all have to be laid down. And once that happens, perhaps it won't be so easy in the future. Isn't that true?
Yes, that's true. And if you go through history, if you look down history, since 1972, there has been only one civilian government which has granted an extension. Otherwise, there have always been some military governments in one role or the other, So this whole process and this whole thing had to change one day. There had, when we saw the transition of democracy, we saw the first elected government, elected parliament, transferring power to the next civilian government. So this course of events had to follow, There had to be more democracy in other institutions in every sphere of our life. So I think that, given...
Do you think the government was taken by surprise, Zubair Saab, or do you think that they were expecting? I'm going to ask Ibrahim Saab also, but what's your opinion?
Yes, kind of. They were expecting a smooth sailing, and I think everybody was taken by surprise on this thing.
Because it's very last minute, if nothing else. I mean, one has to give, say that as far as bringing it, the government brought the law, the extension forward. Yeah. The way it was formulated, it's been a very last minute thing.
Yeah, the government was caught napping. Government thought that we had done something, although some people were pointing out some of the problems in this whole process, the notification, the discrepancies here and there, as the Chief Justice has pointed out, that somewhere it was extension, somewhere it was reappointment, and somewhere there was a reference to one rule and somewhere to the other rule. And they thought that this will go ahead, perhaps, but unfortunately that did not. Somebody got the eye of it, and it was no less than the Chief Justice of Pakistan who got the eye of this minute detail that you have not followed, particularly the institutional things that have to be there. So yes, it is a good thing. And in this way that the government has to respond now, particularly on a very serious matters.
But even other than that, let's set this issue aside for 1 second and let's talk about the government. I'm sure that Ibrahim Khan Saab will have an explanation for us. But as far as the process is concerned, you know, if nothing else, it is a rap on the knuckles for the government.
Yes, rap on the
because you know the Supreme Court is saying, well, you know, whatever you have to get your your T's crossed and your I's dotted before you follow through with the process that is so important. What are the lessons for the government, Ibrahim Saab? What do you think?
I think the timing, or as you said, at the last moment or at the last minute, I mean, it was really hectic, but considering the fact that since the precedent was there, that's why the government didn't take it that seriously. Because of the precedent, and there was no objection raised against those precedent either. I mean, and but I think all well that ends well.
Ibrahim Khan, how important is this appointment? I think I did, my question sort of got lost along the way, but what's your opinion on, as far as the regional security is concerned? The Prime Minister talked about it, and
sure,
you know, as far as this extension is concerned, how important, of course, you know, for the country, for regional security at this time, with a hostile neighbor like India right there, is it for Pakistan at this time?
You have to look at the last 3-4 years back. I mean, the way Pakistan Army has handled things. Let's compare it to our neighbor in Afghanistan, neighboring country Afghanistan, where I think almost 26, 27 countries were joining hands in trying to bring peace to Afghanistan, but they did not succeed. We, as a so-called third world country, the way they mention us, our armed forces went way, I mean, out of the expectations of the rest of the world, and were able to clean out all the terrorist activities and single-handedly. And I think credit goes to General Bajwa and his team and his vision, and I think he deserved that, considering the circumstances at the moment, that we are literally at the brink of war with India, because there are provocations on everyday basis on the line of control line, and I mean, the way they are treating those 80 million Kashmiri people.
Yes.
I mean, there are so many things that have to be considered, and a person who is already, I mean, war hardened and with all the experiences and exposures from, I mean, different enemies of Pakistan, I mean, he has been successfully able to face.
But certainly the army would have been expecting a change in command, as is normal at this time. Isn't that true?
Yes. Under the normal circumstances, I think it should go through normally, but under the prevailing situation, things were not very, I mean, things aren't normal around Pakistan with our bordering countries. And the man who had the exposure and experience of dealing with it, and we as a government, I think I not only think it is our legal right and prerogative of the government and the Prime Minister to suggest the appointments, and President being the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Pakistan can, I mean, you know,
of the Prime Minister to, you know, any
definitely
act, right. Ji, Danish Saab, what happens in the next few months? When do you think when will the government have to bring this law to the Parliament for debate? You know, at the latest, considering that the process has to be finished in 6 months from today, right?
Well, they don't have to start it immediately, but obviously they can't delay it for too long. But because 6 months is not too long a period, you know, for this kind of legislation to be brought and, you know, to be properly debated and to be properly vetted and inputs of various parties and consultations, because this is a matter which is very sensitive, as you already mentioned. So I don't think they should waste any time, and this is an opportunity for them, as I stated earlier, to bring all parties on board.
Right, that's what I want to talk about. They have to bring all parties on board. They have to, considering the opposition, how, of course you said that the political parties, considering how sensitive this issue is, will be willing, should be willing to, as it were, play ball with the government of the day. But don't you think that they will require some wheeling and dealing as far as the government is concerned?
Yes, they will require engagement by the government, and by government I mean obviously the federal cabinet. And we do have another problem, which the law minister has obviously resigned. So obviously the first big challenge, or the first big thing for the government to do, is to bring about such person, because obviously he'll be the one responsible for drafting and for introducing legislation. And before that, I think they will probably need some political element to engage all the political parties and get their inputs before actually coming up with a draft.
Right.
The first draft, obviously it will be shared, there will be debate, and we have to also take into account that there are other pressing issues also for the government. And this issue, although is a very important one, but there are other important issues also, and which is the challenges to the government, uncertainty in the PTI, foreign funding case, what will happen in that, day-to-day hearing. And so what I'm trying to suggest is that waste no time, deviate from your past behavior of deciding things without consulting other political parties. Engage political elements in your political party, in your government. Not go to, or not give this task to those people or those elements who are hawkish in nature, because otherwise there will be a deadlock, and deadlock will obviously, the timeline will obviously, it can pass. So that is my suggestion.
Ibrahim Saab.
I will beg to disagree. It's not bringing in a complete new law. I do agree with him on a subject that yes, everybody should be taken on board. Yes, it
But
is.
will your
It's an
government
issue
take
of a
everyone on
national
board?
concern. We should all, definitely take everyone into confidence.
Right.
But there are some amendments within this law, 243. There are some amendments which have been pointed out by the Chief Justice of Pakistan, Honorable Chief Justice of Pakistan.
Right.
And for bringing changes or adding those few points, I think you can pass the law with the simple majority.
But Ibrahim Saab, as far as, of course that may be true, and I'll go to Danish with this, considering the legal side of things. But regardless of that, there will be considerable debate on a host of issues that, historically have not been debated in Pakistan. There's no denying that, right?
I think this should be taken as an opportunity, as Zubair Saab said, that this is the first time, and this is for the further improvement in our system and
Right,
strengthening the
course.
system of democracy.
But it will, like Danish said, require considerable engagement by your political, by the government, by PTI, also with other political parties, to convince them. And of course, one would like them to look at it as an opportunity, but that may not happen with some political parties. There's no, guarantee that
I think
they
it's
will
a matter
follow
of a
suit.
national interest, and if you would look back a couple of months back when there was this tensions really were very high between Pakistan and India, you saw all of Pakistan and all parties join hands.
You're hopeful
And
that they will all play ball.
This is exactly because this is not an issue of one or the other party. It's an issue of national concern and a legitimate one, and should be dealt with in accordance
Zubair
with
sir,
the
what do you
instructions
expect?
given by
I-
the Chief Justice of Pakistan.
I again take
Right.
it as an opportunity for this government to have a more
Yes,
consensus-based government,
Right.
to tone down their rhetoric. Nawaz Sharif Saab is out of the country. Zardari Saab is languishing in the jail.
But you're talking about rhetoric, and the Prime Minister even today said
Yes.
that it is about mafias who have looted the country and have
Yes.
stashed their money abroad.
Perhaps I'm thinking that perhaps from tomorrow onward the rhetoric will be a bit lower, because
Right.
at the end of the day you definitely need the other political parties to go with you. I do agree with Ibrahim Saab that this is a simple majority, but as far as the Senate of Pakistan is concerned, you will have a serious challenge in passing in any law. As for the National Assembly, you have the majority and you can get it through. So for both the houses to get it through to become a law, then you might need more or extra support from the other parties. And I think they are ready onto this. It's such an issue, and we are not talking about one individual person here. We are talking about changing the law and plugging those holes which have been left by the previous government. So let's not talk about Bajwa Sahab, let's not talk about the incumbent Chief of Army Staff, because laws are made for the future generations and laws are organic. I hope Danish will agree with me.
Yes.
They grow with the people,
yes.
They grow with the communities. Whenever there is a challenge, we need to make laws. So this is a challenge. So this new law with this organic situation, there is always a first for many people. For us, there are quite a few new firsts.
Yes.
So this is a first time situation, then we can learn and move ahead. This Chief of Army Staff gets an extension or maybe another one comes in, but there will be a certain set parameters that if a government decides to retain an existing Chief of Army Staff for X number of years until this law will again be changed. So the other opposition parties, I don't think so they will have any problem with it. Yes, the minute details that you keep referring to, they may not come in the open discussion. They may go into the in-camera if there are certain things that are restricted in nature, that needs special attention, that they don't want to come under the public eye of a microscope. They can go in camera quite simply. But the basic principles that if a government decides to extend or even appoint or even reappoint or even terminate the services of any Chief of Army Staff, they will bring about the changes. And he has rightly pointed out, this is the Act of the Parliament and the Army Act that needs to be changed.
We're talking about, you know, let's look at it, you know, critically speaking. We're talking about a topic that before now, I don't think that, you know, has been debated so much on international TV.
Trust me, there will not be that much debate that you are expecting.
You don't think that there will
No,
be? You don't think that there will be a lot said about the
Yes.
appointment? You don't
Yes.
think that will happen?
No, that won't happen. There will be few things that will be decided. That there are certain set standards already for 3 years that has not been written, that will be put in place.
You don't
there
think
will be
that
a certain
this affects
procedure
the-
that's not been there, that will put in place. Only thing perhaps that will make a kind of a disturbance that you may refer to is the kind of the details of that new appointment, the perks and the privileges and the salary and all
which
that,
the Supreme Court
which may
referred
not be
to.
in the public domain at the moment.
Which the Supreme Court referred to.
So we may simply say that if I'm not a legal expert, but I may say that the the extension of the Chief Army Staff will continue with the existing pay and privileges that he has already been drawing.
Do you think that they will, okay, let's ask Danish. Danish, do you think that they will be open as far as the perks and privileges are concerned? Because there was some talk about it in the Supreme Court also. Do you think that as a lawyer that question will be opened up to the Parliament, will be debated on?
Well, look, as a student of law, I believe that since the matter has come in the public domain, I believe each and every single aspect must be dealt with to have a stop to this debate. And even though Ibrahim Saab is right that the government might need a simple majority, but in my humble opinion, this is not a matter of a simple majority. If you go by that thinking, then you might overlook certain debates and certain opinions, which might turn out later to be important and subject to a challenge later on. So, I mean, what I'm trying to say is that let's talk about building a consensus on this issue. Yes. It's a very important issue, and the army chief is considered to be one of the most powerful persons in Pakistan, for good or worse. There can be a debate on that, but he is a very important person.
But do you think it affects the power structure? I mean, it doesn't. If this happens, the law is formulated. It even passes through. It doesn't prevent a person. In a sense, it does lay a precedent. Critically speaking, it lays a precedent for the Supreme Court to interfere. It hasn't to lay even if it's done that, to lay the guidelines for this. It is, in a sense, a step in an uncharted territory. I'll say that again. It does allow individuals, it will allow individuals to go to the Supreme Court on this matter. And even though technically that was allowed even before, it hadn't ever happened. That's true, right?
Well, I think the fact that this extension was given and then, this matter was brought up and people used to argue whether it should happen or should not happen.
But they never went to court on it.
It went to court, but it was always, like I said earlier, in the Islamabad High Court regarding the General Kiani's extension,
Yes.
It did go in the Islamabad High Court, but it was held to be non-maintainable. in that particular instance.
So what happens to that kind of a situation now after the Supreme Court has spoken on this issue? If it were to be repeated, for example, with regard to anybody else?
Well, the jurisdiction, you know, I mean, the Supreme Court has assumed the jurisdiction once, so
there
obviously
will
it
be
can happen again.
So it will be maintainable.
It can be, obviously. I mean, it will be. But I mean, the fact of the, if you look at the order that has been given, and
Right.
we are awaiting the long order also, I do believe that there will be substance in that order. There will be these matters will be the speculations, you know, and why this matter should be going to the Apex Court, why it came to the Apex Court, why the Apex Court took, you know, everything, every particular aspect will be dealt with, I'm pretty sure. This is not a judgment, you know, which will be forgotten. This will be kept, you know, in our history books for a long time to come.
Right, right.
And even in this particular case, I think judicial restraint has been exercised. I mean, they left it to the parliament, even though there was speculation, there was uncertainty that the matter was being, you know, taken up, and then afterwards the petitioner, you know, he withdrew, but the court had the powers to, you know, suo motu take it up. So that did happen, but
judicial
now
restraint, like you said, you know, of course, they could have decided the parameters themselves. They could have assumed jurisdiction of those matters also. But like you said, you know, they've chosen to give it back to the parliament.
Yes, and they have given reasoning for that. You know, they said that this is a matter which, you know, we should not interfere with, because obviously this is a matter which the whole acts and the whole law that was under consideration, you know, it was legislated by the parliament, and now they want the parliament to do it again and, you know, correct the defects or the
lacunas or the loopholes, if there are any,
Yeah.
and which the Supreme Court feels. Ji Ibrahim.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that instead of putting it like the intervention into the power corridors of executive, it's not like that. I think with a very really genuine belief that the Honorable Chief Justice of Pakistan did was the word which really fits for this whole thing is properly defined is his guidance. He really guided us into this. Okay, these are the things which you are missing in this particular law, and try to fill those out so that the situation does not arise again in any other case. So I think this is the message, and which was blown out of proportion, and the
you don't think that perhaps, you know, the Supreme Court was saying that they can and they do have the power to interfere in anything, you know, and there are no sacred cows in this country, in a sense?
They have the power within the parameters of the law.
Right, of course.
And I mean, we are the lawmakers, and they
that,
define the law.
You know, right,
they define the law.
Also interpret.
Yes, interpret and define the law. Exactly. So nobody has any. This is exactly what I am saying, that they have not. I mean,
but when you say that it's only law is only for the rich and only for the influential and not for, you know, perhaps lesser beings, the Supreme Court is in a sense saying that the law and the power of the Supreme Court to adjudicate on that law is for everyone.
We will get into a different debate on that then, because you know, actually it still exists.
Right.
As a matter of fact, it's very unfortunate it still does exist.
You
this
think
is
it
one
does?
particular case which Supreme Court has taken up.
Right.
But if you look at the people at large, I mean, there are so many people who are sick and far sicker than Mr. Sharif, who has left this country, and who are convicted also, and they have not been able to avail those opportunities and being treated abroad. And so I would be very clear about this, but let's not touch
Let's not go into that.
Into that.
But this is also a call for the government that they are through around 20% of their tenure, that there are a lot of legislation that is required in this country, even for the appointment and the extension of the Chief of Army Staff, as Danish has pointed out, that one of the strongest positions, arguably, that we have in this country. If they are not defined, what about other laws? There has been a strong need for police reforms, for governance reforms, for local government reforms, for legal reforms. There are so many things to be done as far as the legislation is concerned. So the government has to really put its foot down on the legislative side, the parliament working, how it should be working. And if they keep their cudgels up and keep their swords out against the opposition parties and keep that chest thumping all the
Right.
time going on, then this legislation will
Will
go
suffer,
begging.
right? Exactly, like
We
it
have
has
to
in the
work more,
past.
more on
Ibrahim
this
Khan
area.
Sahab, do you think, you know, to be fair, as far as the legislation is concerned, there has been, you know, the government needs to really pull up their socks as far as the legislation, considering, you know, on different areas. Let's forget this
I'll
issue,
just
but let's
quote
talk
you an
about
example. A couple of days back, we were able to pass like 11 different legislative, work we were able to do, and the whole opposition was stood up and agitating that you are just decimating the opposition and, you know, not listening to anybody as you're passing these laws. I mean, on one hand, when we try to accelerate things, then they agitate, and if we slow down things, then they again agitate. But unfortunately, you know, what I have seen in my personal observation, this is my first time in the National Assembly. We, as assembly or as parties, different parties, we are not really looking at the national interest. We are looking for personal interest
Personal
and for
interest
our
or party
or our
interest right.
party interest.
But
I think that should not be the spirit. The spirit
should be about, right.
prime spirit should be, for Pakistan comes first.
right, of course.
And we should all think in that direction. Then if we can rise a little bit above that, how can I make my boss happy?
Right. We
Kind
have to
of a
rise above that,
situation.
right.
We can be.
Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for joining us, Barrister Danish Iftikhar. Thank you for being with us. Dr. Zubair Ghauri, thank you for joining us. Mohammad Ibrahim Khan Sahab, thank you for being with us. Of course, as far as matters of national importance are concerned, it is expected from, like we talked about, the members of the parliament to rise above their political interests, their party interests, and think about the national interests. And one hopes that the representatives of political parties can do that once they become MNAs or MPAs within national or provincial assemblies. Let's hope they can do that. As far as this development is concerned, let's look at it as a welcome development. Let's look at it as a move towards formalizing and actually for the Supreme Court to have stepped into this area is perhaps a welcome move, so that more certainty for everyone all around, for the government, for the opposition, for the political representatives all around. Let's hope that a law can be passed that actually finalizes those details, so that there's less speculation and, like the Prime Minister said, less conspiracy theories. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.